There's a reason that like people who win the lottery spend it all and they don't have much of a story to tell along the way. There's TV shows based around this now, right? It's because there was no journey. It was just, I did this and I got this and then I spent it all. And that was kind of like my journey, right? And some of them, of course, for TV, they'll dramatize it, make it all sound like more than it is. But when you're someone who's like, I started a business, it didn't work. I tried another one, it didn't work. And then I did one that had these ups and downs for years, but it was such a fun ride, such a great experience. It shaped who I am today, and now I can share that with you. And many people who share that are like, and I'm still on this journey, by the way. Like everyone kind of always shares that same thing. So for me, it's about making the journey a true, meaningful experience. If you hate parts of it, stop. If you love parts of it, dive into it. Make sure you're having fun along the way, because I think that too many of us entrepreneurs, we're just stressed. We're not sleeping. We're not enjoying it. And it's like, man, well, then what are we doing here? Like, we're smart. We could go get jobs and probably do just about anything really well. Maybe that would be better for you. And I'm not telling you go get a job and stuff like that, right? If you're an entrepreneur, what I'm saying is like, we need to make sure that as leaders that we're fulfilled, that we're enjoying the experience along the way. And to me, that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned since getting into business of any kind. And really, it's been the hardest one for me, because I tend to be a results-driven guy. Like, even follow one course until successful, right? It's very results. But the more I can step away from that and just be like, you know what? Today was beautiful. Like, I had some troubles, but I had some really good things that happened. The better I seem to do, the better I seem to show up for the people that I serve along the way.
Welcome back once again to the Leading with Integrity podcast. And today I'm very pleased to welcome Alex Sanfilippo of Podmatch.com. It's fair to say this podcast would not be here without the company that he has built. Anyone who's been listening from the beginning will know that after the first 6 episodes or so, I very quickly ran out of guests and had to take a 6-month break. And I've talked about this before. I was lucky enough to come across Podmatch.com, and we've not really looked back. We've been over 150 episodes now, well over 150, 160 now, in fact. It's been 3.5 years. Feels like less time than that. Weekly episodes ever since, with bonuses here and there as well, as you know, hopefully. None of that would really have happened without companies like Podmatch, without some great people at various online networking events that I've mentioned before as well. But today, we're going to be hearing from Alex about his story, his journey as an entrepreneur, which started at the tender age of 10, went via a few other businesses, then a 15-year break working in the aerospace industry, as you do, before finally switching over to Podmatch full-time. So we'll hear all about that. We'll hear about why he's so passionate about podcasting. He's got some great tips if you ever considered becoming a podcast host yourself. Highly recommend that, by the way. And also some great tips for a podcast listener. So if you're here, those tips will be useful to you, because this is a podcast and you are listening to it. There we go. All right, well, that's enough from me. Let's get Alex on the show. I hope you enjoy this episode. There's some great lessons in there about leadership, about life as well, and of course about podcasting.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Alex, welcome to the show. It's a true honour to have you on the show. I've said before, and I'll say again, I'm sure, without Podmatch, without your company, Leading with Integrity wouldn't still be going. I would have run out of guests a very, very long time ago. So thank you for everything you do. And yeah, welcome.
David, thank you so much for having me. And honestly, like those kind of, that means so much to hear. I mean, I built Podmatch. I'll get into that in a moment, what it is, so people aren't left in the dark here, but built it with the exact intent that people like you, great podcasters like you, would be able to find it and be able to serve you. So that just means so much. And I'm really thankful to be here. Someone who's listened to your podcast. I'm excited to be on this side of the microphone. So pretty cool.
Lovely. Well, in at the deep end, I think. So over to you to, well, tell us the story of Podmatch, but also your background, your career, your story so far, and why you do it.
Yeah. So I got into entrepreneurship at a very young age, the age of 10, if you can count this as an entrepreneurial venture. But I was intentionally making money and started a business with some kids in the neighborhood. And the idea was, at 10, I was like, is there something we can sell? So we tried the whole lemonade thing. I don't know if listeners will remember a time when kids used to sit in the corner and you charge, I don't know what it was, a quarter or something like that for for lemonade. If we were smart, we would have charged like 26 cents and been like, sorry, we can't accept anything less. And they give you 50 or something. Right. But anyway, but I just realized like at a young kid, this was like the first time I had this realization that I was actually good at something, because I did math in my head and I was like, wait a minute, my parents paid for like the mix and for this, and then we're sitting out here. I'm like, this isn't profitable. And the other kids, including some of them being my siblings, they're like, what are you talking about? We're making money. Who cares what they spend? I'm like, but it's not profitable. And they just couldn't understand it as a 10-year-old. Apparently that was weird for me to understand that. But it was kind of this weird point of my life where I realized that I was good at something. And I was kind of that kid who wasn't really good at sports, wasn't good at music. I wasn't great in school. I wasn't good at video games either. So it was like this weird like kid that kind of was okay at everything. But I realized, okay, I do have a mind for business even at this young age. And so instead of doing lemonade, which I realized wasn't profitable, I watched a golfer hit a ball in the water. We live right across the street from a golf course. All the time you'd be like selling lemonade, you'd see them hitting balls in the water. I was like, I wonder if we can get those out of there. And so one day we collected a handful of golf balls and decided to see, would a golfer want this? And sure enough, golfers wanted to buy used golf balls at a discount. So me, again, kids in the neighborhood, I was 10 and we aged from like 8 to 12 was probably our age range. We just started this whole operation of getting the balls out of lakes, cleaning them up, organizing them, and then selling them on a Saturday morning. And I loved it. Like, it was really fun. Now, you can only get away with that while you're cute. Like, once you're past the age of 12, I don't know if a golfer likes being sold back a golf ball with their name that they initialed on it, right? But when you're young, they're like, sure, here's a couple dollars for that. And it was a really fun thing. And that was kind of my introduction. And at that point, David, I got really into entrepreneurship. That's around the time that eBay.com opened. And I was like, wow, I can buy things in bulk and then sell them, right? Like, there's all these different like things. So I started doing a lot of that. And because I got really good on a computer at a young age, because that's kind of like was my introduction to it. And I was born in 1988. So to give everyone an idea of the time, like technology, using computers for something useful was like kind of still new. And so I just dove into like flipping things. And that ultimately led me to getting into a startup that was in the real estate space. So it was creating virtual tours of homes. So I built that up when I was in high school. And so I had photographers working for me, editors working for me, and we just kind of built this thing up. And it all started from the fact of I was curious and I got good on computers. And to now fast forward a little bit, the real estate market crashed, which destroyed that business. And that was actually a legitimate business that was paying taxes. My first one when I was 10 was not. Sorry, Uncle Sam over here in the United States. But that one was a legitimate business, but it did crash and burn when the real estate market ended up crashing here. And that's what led me into actually a corporate job for a while, which a lot of people are like, okay, wait, you were an entrepreneur, but you went corporate. I found that I was actually pretty good in corporate, actually even better than I was in entrepreneurship at that point. And I really loved it. I did 15 years in big corporate. I was working in the aerospace industry. It was nothing interesting. I wasn't an astronaut, skydiver, or fighter pilot, right? But it was a really fun career that I just thoroughly enjoyed all the way through. And I operated as what has now been a coined term, which is an intrapreneur, which simply means an entrepreneur operating inside of an organization. And so that's kind of, that was 15 years. And then eventually I got to the point where I think I just got the entrepreneurial itch once again. And it's when that company went public. My last year there was my best year in corporate, but I just saw the writing on the wall that, you know what, it's time for me to bring up the next level of leadership and for me to move on. And ultimately, that's what led me to starting Podmatch and to getting into podcasting full time. And so full circle on the question, David, and I'll just share what Podmatch is very quickly here. Podmatch is a software that connects podcast guests and hosts for interviews. So Dave and I, we connected on Podmatch. He was looking for someone to come on and talk about leading with integrity, leadership talks, right? And somewhere on my profile, I mentioned that I've led organizations or that integrity is a big part of my life. And the system will match us. We message back and forth in the platform. We're able to do an interview like this. And ultimately, the whole goal of it is just to help guests and hosts find each other faster so the episode can get released and serve the people that are going to listen to it. And that's what I'm doing full time. And I absolutely love it. Like being full time in entrepreneurship and now back in going again, full circle. Like I grew up on computers and now I'm like really back into that, right? Has just been a really cool thing. Like what I do is an absolute gift. I feel like I'm doing what I was made to do right now. Like if I was put on earth to do something, it's what I'm doing right now. And for that, I'm just so grateful to be here. So David, with all that, I'll turn it back over to you. Sorry, I talked a lot about my history. Hopefully that was a good background for everybody here.
No, absolutely was. Yeah, interesting. So I didn't know about the aerospace connection either, because I mean, we have common ground there too, having spent over a decade in that industry myself. Maybe we can talk about that another time. But yeah, so from that to Podmatch, I mean, was there something in between? Did you start listening to podcasts? Were you on them? Did you have one? Or was it just literally, that looks interesting, I'm going to go and have a go at that? What led you to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question to get into. So I actually had some overlap with this. I started my first podcast in 2014. Again, being in aerospace, it was a really fun job, but it didn't necessarily fulfill in every way. I still want to do something on computers. And yes, there was a lot of computer work, but not the type of stuff I want to do. So I started a blog, just really small stuff. And I think I started that in 2012 and 2013. I heard my first podcast and I was like, that sounds super fun. And so I started one in 2014. And so I had some introduction to podcasting. And then I had built I'd done one show that I actually ended up selling with that blog, which was just kind of like a side thing. It wasn't like huge or anything like that. There was just a company that's like, we really want this. I was like, okay. But I started another podcast, entrepreneurship podcast. Around the time I was like, you know what? I think I want to leave corporate. I decided to start a podcast to talk to people who had successfully done that. And the reason I did that is because, again, not necessarily being fully fulfilled by the work I was doing, I was starting little side hustles that were just, David, full transparency, failing left and right, just weren't working. And that kind of made me realize, I'm like, okay, after 12 years or 13 years in corporate so far, clearly I've like, I need to learn some things. Like I can't just jump in like I did when I was a kid and the stars would align. That's just not how it usually goes for people. So I started that podcast to learn how people actually left a full-time career to become a full-time entrepreneur. And I learned a lot during that. And that was going on while I had my corporate job. And I already mentioned this, but I like to always make sure this is known. My last year at that company, my 15th year, was my best year I ever had there. I mean, I think every year was good. I started as a part-time guy. I ended as on the C-suite. It was a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar organization. Like I worked really hard. And I like to say it because I believe the way that you end one season is the way that you start the next. I know integrity is a big part of what we talk about here. That's how I believe you leave with integrity so you can start your new venture leading with integrity as well. And so there was overlap, but never to the extent of, I was never the guy who's like, I hate this job, I can't wait to leave. Like that never happened once. And there was no good riddance when I left. I cried on my way out the door the last day. It was bittersweet after that 15 years. A lot of my life and time went into that. But that's kind of how I got into this podcasting thing, is it was just something I was doing as a side hustle along the way.
Well, I mean, huge respect for that because, yeah, I mean, I don't know. If I'd loved my last job, I probably would still be doing it. Like, so I think that's quite a rare perspective, actually. Interesting. And I also love like the approach to starting your own podcast. I think quite a lot of people do this, but I don't know that we talk about it enough. But you chose something that you wanted to learn about. And then every conversation you have, like even if nobody ever listens to it, which I'm sure wasn't the case, you've still got something out of it. You've still learned something from that conversation. And yeah, I love that approach as well. So what is it then about podcasting? You're obviously incredibly passionate about it. What keeps that passion alive?
Yeah. Well, the reason what drew me to it is I was blogging and doing stuff like on websites. And then I found podcasting. I can remember the show I listened to. I can't remember the name of the show. I can remember the episode I listened to, and it was really raw. Like it was a show that wasn't edited. I think I typed in something random in Apple Podcasts because that was like the only option back then. And I was listening to, and there was like this 10-second pause where this person was just trying not to cry. And I was like, man, this is like I like to blog, but I edit out words if they're not good, right? Like there's no pause for this. And so it kind of just hit me. I was like, man, this is like, I want this, right? And so as someone who's always loved what's considered the creator economy, like the online space, creating content, right? Blogging was really cool. But as soon as I found podcasting, I heard it. I was like, I love this. So I wanted to talk. And it wasn't like I was just automatically good at it or knew what to do or had all the confidence in the world. I was terrified the first time I pressed record. I know I was sweating. Thankfully, it was audio only, so no one could see that, right? But I was terrified. But I was like, you know what? I like the authenticity of this, how raw it is. To me, it's still one of the most pure forms of expression online. Like is through this medium. And yes, there's the video element now. And for many people, they're still only consuming it through audio, which is me. I'm typically working out while I'm listening to a podcast. I'm not watching it, or driving. I'm also not watching it, but I just love the expression behind it. So for me, I became passionate about it because I just think it's a great way to reach people and meet them transparently where they are. I've seen very few things impact people's lives in such a big way as podcasting. And for me, man, that sets me on fire to be part of it.
Yeah, me too. I think it's one of those things as well. Yeah, I don't know about you. I mean, working out is a good example. Driving is when I listen to most of the podcasts I listen to. But I also love, like, if I'm doing some sort of work or I'm doing like do-it-yourself jobs around the house or something like that, I'm putting shelves up, things like that, things that don't necessarily need a lot of brain power, I can have a good podcast on in the background, and then I feel like I'm still learning stuff while I'm doing this, not difficult task. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if I could share that point real quick, David, if that's all right. When I was a kid, I really struggled with comprehension and retention, and so much so that I went to doctors for that. And there was this one doctor who told my mom, he goes, you know what, do you have Legos at the house? She's like, yeah. He's like, next time you're trying to teach him something, put a bunch of Legos in front of him and let's see what happens. And so my mom said, Alex, here's some Legos, play with them, but I want you to listen to me while you're doing that. And my retention went from nothing to retaining almost 100%. And I learned to cope that way through school. And so my retention and the way I just understood things was very low to one of the highest of my class all the way through. Not because I was playing with Legos the whole time, but I just learned how to have this idea of I need to be doing something with my hands while I'm learning. And for what you just said is so true. For me, I listen to podcasts not only while I'm driving or working out, but while I'm doing anything that doesn't require too much thought. And for me, it's the best way for me to retain anything. Like if you sit me in front of a screen where I'm learning from somebody, or even if there's someone on a stage, I'm sitting in a seat, I don't retain nearly as well than if it's on a podcast, because I can hear what I need to hear while I'm doing something that doesn't take a lot of thought. So I really like that you shared that. And for me, I think it's really maybe one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it. I've never thought about it like this before, is because it just takes me back to what finally gave me a breakthrough as a young kid. And I still am able to hold on to that and learn better that way.
Yeah, it is. I'm always intrigued by the ways different people do the same thing, because I think, we're all individuals. We're all in different places on various scales and spectrums, don't we? But I love, particularly with things like learning, and how, so all the way through school, I was always very much I read it, I make notes, that's how I retain knowledge. That doesn't work so well for me anymore. I don't know what's changed necessarily. Maybe it's just like the virtual space. Because I'm similar generation to you, maybe a few years ahead of you. I won't say how many. So, I think our generation had that really interesting point in growing up, didn't we? Because we're old enough that we remember the world before the internet, or at least before it was widespread. But then we were also that sort of first generation that had to really learn how to make it part of our lives and part of our work as well. And that's, I'd say things like, I'm going off on a tangent, I know, but that sort of stuff really interests me, about how we each take that sort of technology and these new things, and podcasting is one of those. And then sort of before you even realize you've done it, it's become part of your daily life. And it's become a way that you learn, or it's become a way you connect with the world or do business even. Anyway, tangent over.
For everybody listening, I'll give you my podcast listener strategy, like how I listen. What I've gotten the habit of doing, David, is I will type in a topic into Apple, Spotify, Amazon. I'm mentioning all those because it doesn't actually matter. Into your player app of choice. They're all getting pretty good at this point. And I type in what I'm actually wanting to listen to. And I will find 10 different podcasts covering the topic. And I will add those 10 episodes to my queue. And next time I have a couple hours of free time, or I say free time, I put it in a block. And typically I'll do that. I'll go on a long walk or something like that. Or if there's a project at the house I need to do, that's what I'll do. I'll go through those 10 things. But it's always a topic that I'm really curious about, or that I know I need to learn to better me as a leader, to just improve in a skill set, to learn something that's really interesting to me. So I don't do any true crime podcasts or anything like that. Or it's always, for me, just the type of my personality. I like to be learning. And I've found that I come out 3 hours later, far above average on a topic that I previously knew nothing about. And that's all it took, was a few hours. And now people are like, man, you really know your stuff. I'm like, well, I spent 3 hours listening to 10 different experts talk about it in their own unique way. And I pulled my favorite information out of it. I think that's a cool podcast listening hack right there that's really served me. Over the last 2 years I've been doing that. It's been kind of a game changer.
So I have to ask them, what's the coolest or most memorable thing that you've learned as a podcast listener?
Man, there have been so many There are so many things. I'm going to try to think of one that is not going to go into our conversation today. So I learned, here was an example. I wanted to learn more about like non-American cars. I've always liked cars. So I dove into that topic. And this one guy he shared beautifully on Aston Martin, which is a car I've always really liked. I mean, I grew up watching James Bond. I still love Bond movies, right? And Aston Martin's kind of like that's the thing. And he like dove deep into the background where the name came from. And they're also just like, this car's fast and this one's even faster. Right. But he's like, here's where the name came from. Here's why there's this model. Here's why there's this. And I came out like knowing a lot about Aston Martin. And so that was like, again, a little bit of like a, more on the vanity side of things. Like it didn't help me as a leader, but it was just something I was curious about. I was like, let me learn more about cars that aren't American made. And there was, that one guy, I listened to, again, a bunch of podcasts, but I was like, man, the way he shared this, like I went back and listened to it because I feel like he shared it like so passionately. So yeah, that was something fun. So I know a lot about Aston Martin.
Yeah, I don't think there's such a thing as useless knowledge. I think, it's one day that'll come in handy for some reason.
Yeah, if I'm ever buying one or helping somebody do it, I'll be like, you don't want that one. Let me tell you the history of why.
yeah, definitely. Or future hobby, restoring old Aston Martins.
True, yeah.
So many people, I think, are sitting there with an idea maybe of a podcast that they might want to do one day, and they haven't done it yet. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is the age-old question in my world now, David. Should I start a podcast? Right? Mm-hmm. Like everyone, like, what do you think, Alex? Should I do it? To me, my answer is yes, but if. So yes, if you have a message that you actually want to get out, a purpose, and the purpose doesn't have to be to become the next biggest podcaster or to change the world, right? It could just be, I'm really interested in talking to people that own Aston Martins, right? Like it could be something simple, just a hobby that you have. There's a podcaster that I really respect. He's one of my favorites, Jordan Harbinger. Millions of people listen to his podcast every month. He is one of the biggest solo podcasters out there. And I asked him, like, what's the secret? He's like, man, keep it a hobby as long as you possibly can. He's like, yeah, treat it like a business with like the systems and stuff. He's like, but make it a hobby, like have fun, love what you do, have like your own purpose behind it. And he shared that. And I was like, man, that is not what I expected to hear, right? From one of the biggest podcasters on the planet. And the thing is, I think that we need to have that purpose, that message, what it is that we want to get out because of it. I think if you're just like, I want to start a podcast because I think I can make money or because everyone else is doing it, or maybe it'll grow my influence. I think there's better options for you. I don't think that it's what you should do. But again, if you say, you know what, I really want to talk about leading with integrity, that one's taken. But let's just say like you really want to talk about it. And David, you're passionate about leading with integrity, which is something that is at my core. And so I love that. So other people that are at that's at their core, that's why they're listening to this. So just think about that. Like if you're like, I want to start one, what is the real reason? What is the real purpose? And right along with that, Dave, if I can just quickly share stats, I won't make this too crazy, but I wrote these down because I had a feeling this was going to come up. And if anyone wants to see this information, because I'm not going to try to share too many numbers, but if you go to podmatch.com/report, you can see what I'm about to share. There are about 2.7 million podcasts. So the next follow-up question, the reason I'm mentioning this is because people say, should I start a podcast? Well, aren't there already too many? There's 2.7 million, yes, but there's only 381,000 that are active. And of those active, 95% of the listenership is among 35,000 of those shows. And this is pulling out all the celebrity shows, all the big network shows that everyone would be familiar with. This is just looking at the independent level. There's 35,000 shows that have people really listening to them, 95% of listeners. It's not saturated. There's plenty of space. And the reality is there's probably some area of passion or hobby that you have. There's probably not even a podcast that solely focuses on it. And so again, do I think you should launch a podcast? Yes. And I bet there's no one else doing what you would want to do the way that you'd want to do it, but make sure it's really true to what you want. And David, I'm sorry if I want to like a little rant there about this. This is like one of the most common questions I get. So I just kind of go on autopilot when I hear this one.
No worries. No, we love a good stat. And that is an interesting one. Especially the 35,000. I didn't know that one. I'd heard the 300,000 and the 2.7 or whatever it was. Yeah. And I also really love that whole keep it a hobby as long as you can. Because I feel like if you go into it with that in your mind and for that reason and knowing what that purpose of the show is for you, you're more likely to stick it out and become one of those. Well, I mean, don't know what that is as a percent. My maths isn't good enough, but one of those who's getting those listeners, let's call it. As opposed to if you just go into it expecting it to be I don't know, a marketing tool for you, or it's going to be your lead generation method, and then within 6 months it's not done what you wanted it to do, it would be very difficult to stick with it after that point, especially if you don't really enjoy it.
Yeah. And people can do that. Like I don't have a problem with podcasting as a business. I just think if it's solely that from the start, like, man, people are smart. Like they can hear if you're not really there, right? Like David, I listen to your podcast, and it's because I know that you at your core care about your topic. If your podcast is called Leading with Integrity and all you want to do is put me into a sales funnel and sell me something, like I would be able to see that, right? Like I could understand that's what you're trying to do, but it's raw, it's authentic, and you actually practice what you preach and walk it out. And for me, nothing is better than that. And I think that listeners are smart. So if you're like, okay, Alex, like I don't really have a hobby, but I know I can make money if I make it about this. Like David just said, like, I don't know if you're going to see that result. And if you do, it's gonna be hard to stick with it because you don't love it, right? It's not a hobby. It's not something that you're passionate about. The best shows I've seen are the ones that someone really has they have a love and a passion for. Or alternatively, and I guess I could share this as well, David, also just a passion to get something out into the world. I know some people, this is not necessarily their hobby, but like they feel very strongly against human trafficking. And so they have started some podcasts to raise awareness about that. That it probably is a bit draining from a work standpoint, but they have so much passion inside saying, this is how I'm going to serve the world. I'm going to be the biggest advocate for getting this known among the entire globe, that I'm going to make a podcast about it. That works as well. And it's that one has a little bit more weight to it, of course. But if you're like, man, I got to raise awareness for this, then that's a great way to get into podcasting as well. But yeah, I think that you can podcast as a business. You can make money doing it. My podcast drives revenue, but I'm telling you what, like you can hear that I'm passionate about it. If it didn't drive revenue, that's okay. I'm still going to do it because I absolutely love what I'm doing. And I know I'm sharing in a way that I can show up to really serve.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that's the only reason I'm still here is because it's fun for me. Anything else that happens is just, nice extras.
Right.
If not, I'm not that bothered.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So let's go back then to your business career, I guess, from the age of 10 all the way through to what you're doing today. If you had to pick out your top lessons, shall we say top 3, top 5, up to you, that you would offer to any like budding entrepreneur or potential business owner who might be in the audience, what would those lessons be, do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the obvious one to this audience, to everyone listening to this, and it's integrity is super important. And I think that people hearing that might be like, oh, obviously you're going to say that on this podcast, but no, I'm not just saying that to say that. The reality is integrity is everything. In every online business these days, it's probably all business period. There's a big lack of integrity, and you can tell because it's the founder who's always looking over their shoulder. It's the entrepreneur that's always like, wait, what do you think I did? Right? Like the one that you can tell there's something that is off. There's something that's being hidden. And man, I'm telling you, like I was part of something, and I wasn't directly part of it, and I can't share many details, but before I ended up doing really well in that aerospace organization, I caught on to something that was unethical that was happening. And that whole group of people was looking over their shoulder, and I started looking over my shoulder too. And even though I wasn't involved, I just heard a little bit of it. I'm like, man, these people must wake up every day. Yeah, they're making a lot of money. Maybe stealing it might be a better way to say it, but they don't sleep. They can't sleep. And for me, like, you're not going to make it as an entrepreneur or someone in business if you don't truly have integrity. For me, and I'm not trying to sound like a saint or like I'm perfect or anything like that, but the way we've always run our business since we started in Podmatch is we're always going to do what's most right for the people we serve. We are always going to do what's most right for the people we serve. If someone came out, if I was like on stage and someone in the audience said, this guy stole money, I could say with 100% confidence, no, I didn't. There is no way I did that. That goes against the absolute integrity and core belief I have of we're here to serve people and do only what's most right to them, even if at our own expense at times. To me, integrity is so important. I sleep extremely well at night. Sure, sometimes I have stressful moments in the job because of the work itself, right? But there's never been anything that's unethical that's happened. I'm not saying that to say that I'm somebody great or amazing, but the reality is it's actually easier to walk in integrity than not. Just don't do bad things and don't take shortcuts, right? Like treat people well. Have that person first mentality. And someone who did this really well, actually, I'm going to call back a previous episode of your show real quick, David. It was I wrote down the number, episode 151, released on January 8th, 2025. It was with Jason Bernard. And Jason talked about how People do business with people. And that's why your personal brand matters. Your reputation matters, is because people do business with people. If you're not a person of integrity, what type of people are you going to attract? What type of people are you going to work with? And by the way, when you're done with this episode, please, like, even now, add it to your queue. Episode 151 with Jason Bernard on the same show. David, you did a phenomenal job. It's worth the listen multiple times. Put that one on repeat. But the first point I want to share here is in integrity. And David, I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to add there before I move on to the next one here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you about integrity, obviously. I mean, the clue is in the name, isn't it? I think it's one of those words as well that is misunderstood, and different people have different interpretations of what it's about. And I think, and same with authenticity, because, there's an argument that people who are not living ethically can still be authentic, can still be living, with integrity to their values. It's just their values are where the problem is. And there's some great examples from history where certain, famous dictators, for example, did horrible, evil things, but those were the things they said they were going to do. So was that without integrity? Don't know. For me, though, yes, it was, because I think there is an ethical component for both of those aspects, authenticity and integrity. And I think actually, if you are, it's one of my favorite definitions of integrity is doing the right thing even when no one's looking. And I think that fits so well with everything you've just said. So yeah, long answer to say, yes, I agree with you. There we go. That's the short version.
You just said that the key. I mean, if there's only one takeaway from this episode for people listening today, do the right thing even when no one's looking. I mean, you can't go wrong if you do that, right? You just can't. That's good, David. I'll jump right into my next one here. This one will be less heavy. All right. They'll get less and less heavy. I think maybe, this next one is the word focus, which I've learned to really treat as an acronym. So focus stands for follow one course until successful. Follow one course until successful. As entrepreneurs, many of us, myself included, shiny objects are our biggest enemy. Opportunity can even be our biggest enemy, because at some point opportunity becomes distraction. And the opposite of focus is distraction. How easy are we distracted by the next big thing? Oh, a new AI tool came out, I got to try it. Oh, there's a new place to record my podcast, I got to try it, right? And the reality is, maybe we don't need to do all those things. And I've in some circles, I've become slightly unpopular because I'm known as somebody who does not look for more opportunities. And some people are like, man, Alex, you never get on like collaboration calls or anything like that. I'm like, it's because I know where I'm going. I'm focused. I'm following one course until successful. I know who I serve and how I serve them. My path is very clear. Therefore, if I do this joint venture thing with somebody, or we start this new webinar or do this, I'm taking my focus away from the goal, the thing that I know that I'm supposed to be doing. And what I'm doing right now, I feel like I was put on earth to do. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so any sort of opportunity at this point has become a form of distraction. Even if it might be able to grow my company faster, it can still be distraction. It takes me away from serving the people that I know I'm supposed to serve. And so I think as entrepreneurs, we need to learn to focus and have clarity right along with it. I think those two things go hand in hand. So focus, but have clarity as the end result, the direction. Because if you're focused but going the wrong way, that's not going to serve you well. You've got to have the clarity of, hey, here's the destination, here's the result, and now I'm going to follow one course until successful. For me, it's a tough commitment. It means saying no instead of saying yes. There's a quote that I love with that, and it's every yes has to be protected by 1,000 no's. These are things that I've learned to do, and I'll tell you, the better I get at this idea right here of focus being an acronym, the more successful I've become as an entrepreneur, because most of us were just kind of all over the place. We're doing a bunch of things. Instead of doing more and more, I've learned to do less and less, but just go really deep and really far with those few things that I do. And again, having the clarity of, I know how this serves the person that I say I can serve.
Yeah, I definitely recognize that sentiment, although I'm not great at following it through. I have to say, I'm very much I don't know if I follow the shiny object so much as I get frustrated with something if it doesn't work quickly enough for my timeline.
Right.
I'm working on it. But then I've also had that, all your eggs in one basket problem as well. So I can see both sides of that argument, but yeah.
This brings me right into the next one I wanted to share. And it's because what you just said, I think, is actually key. Like, it doesn't work the way you want it to. I think that going off and finding a solution to a problem is great. Like, we should be doing that. We should make sure that we're moving as frictionless as possible. But at the end of the day, and this actually does go, I said I wasn't going to go as deep anymore. This one goes real deep again, David. Sorry. And everyone listening. But to me, one of the biggest things I learned in business is it's about the journey, not the destination. The journey is the prize. And I think that many of us have probably heard something along the lines of that before. And it seems like such a cliche. And you're like, no, when I'm successful, that'll be the prize. But the thing is, as entrepreneurs, I don't know if we ever actually fully arrive. Like, I'm focused. I'm following one course until successful. What does that word successful look like? To me, I've had to learn it doesn't mean a destination, it means following the journey. And when something does frustrate me, as you just said, David, where I'm like, this thing never works is the way I want it to, I'm going to go change that because my destination is my journey. So when I'm finding frustration in the journey, I'm going to go find something to replace where the frustration is coming from. Because at the end of the day, this whole thing is about creating a meaningful experience. Like you don't get to the end of it and be like, whew, what a ride. I'm here. Now everything's great. Like, no, you're going to reflect back on the good times, the bad times. And remember, these experiences are what shaped who I am and are what really made this meaningful. There's a reason that like people who win the lottery spend it all and they don't have much of a story to tell along the way. Like, there's TV shows based around this now, right? It's because there was no journey. It was just, I did this and I got this and then I spent it all. And that was kind of like my journey, right? And some of them, of course, for TV, they'll dramatize it, make it all sound like more than it is. But when you're someone who's like, I started a business, it didn't work. I tried another one, it didn't work. And then I did one that had these ups and downs for years, but it was such a fun ride, such a great experience. It shaped who I am today. And now I can share that with you. And many people who share that are like, and I'm still on this journey, by the way. Like, everyone kind of always shares that same thing. So for me, it's about making the journey a true, meaningful experience. If you hate parts of it, stop. If you love parts of it, dive into it. Make sure you're having fun along the way, because I think that too many of us entrepreneurs, we're just stressed. We're not sleeping. We're not enjoying it. And it's like, man, well, then what are we doing here? Like, we're smart. We could go get jobs and probably do just about anything really well. Maybe that would be better for you. And I'm not telling you go get a job and stuff like that, right? If you're an entrepreneur, what I'm saying is, like, we need to make sure that as leaders that we're fulfilled, that we're enjoying the experience along the way. And to me, that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned since getting into business of any kind. And really, it's been the hardest one for me, because I tend to be a results-driven guy. Like, even follow one course until successful, right? It's very results. But the more I can step away from that and just be like, you know what? Today was beautiful. Like, I had some troubles, but I had some really good things that happened. The better I seem to do, the better I seem to show up for the people that I serve along the way in it. So I think that would probably be like my last big tip there, I think.
Yeah, I really like that one. I mean, so many things are kind of firing in my brain as you were saying that. And I think, yeah, not to rattle them all off, but so the millionaire, for example, winning the lottery, right? So that just immediately, the cliche in my head was you don't value something if it comes too easily. And I think, whereas there's people who probably work really, really hard for a lot less money, but are way more satisfied and happy with it, and probably spend it way more wisely as well, because they value it more. And I think there's parallels here with nearly everything you've said so far today, actually, to leadership itself as well. You know, we could talk again about what you said earlier about passion and purpose, about values, about integrity, about focus as well, to an extent. And you think about all of the wildly successful, famous entrepreneurs and leaders, they're the ones who did have that almost single-minded focus on what they were doing. Sometimes that wasn't always a good thing. And got them into trouble in some examples. And sometimes it didn't. And sometimes they did have to kind of stray from that path a little bit. But I think it's exactly as you say, you've got to know what you're doing, why you're doing it, where you're going, and value that journey and the people who are on it with you. And that, I think, leads us really nicely into some questions that are more specifically about leadership. So thank you for everything so far. Similar question, though, about leadership. So what would you say has been that biggest lesson that you've learned as a leader from your whole career so far? And obviously you've got some very varied experience there. So I'd love to hear what you've got to say on it.
Yeah, I'm going to share two things here, if that's okay, David. I've got two things. The first one is what really caused me to leave my corporate job and pursue Podmatch full time. So there was no clear break. It wasn't like this was my last day at corporate and 3 months later I started Podmatch, right? Like, and really that's not how it usually goes for people. I started Podmatch about 8 months think it was 8 months before I quit my corporate job. And because I was C-suite, publicly traded, like a really big organization, there's not a 2-week notice thing at that level. There was a 90-day notice. So it was known that I was leaving to pursue this, but there was this whole thing. But pulling the trigger and having that conversation with my CEO, which is who I reported directly to, I was nervous and I just wasn't doing it. And I'll never forget, I picked up this book called High Performance Habits by Brendon Burchard, and they go through 6 high performing habits. So from number 1, 2, 3, I'm like, man, I got these down. I'm great at this, I'm kidding. But I'm like, man, I think I'm set up for this. 5 or 4, 5, same thing. I'm like, yes, I get to number 6, and number 6 was courage. And it hit me immediately. I wasn't even a paragraph in. I'm like, this is why I still have a corporate job right now. And I'm not doing this Podmatch thing full time. And ultimately what I learned in that moment is that courage means being afraid than doing what you have to do anyway. I knew that if I wanted to excel in either of those jobs, one of the things had to leave. I not that I plateaued in my corporate job, but I was using the evenings to work on something. So I wasn't as fresh as I should be, maybe to take things to the next level. But if I wanted Podmatch to grow anymore, I had to put more time into it. And so it was this thing where I was like, I had this really cushy corporate job. And after 15 years at the level I was at, there was all kinds of perks. I didn't even know how to pay a phone bill anymore, right? There was things that just came along with it that you just don't know. But courage means being afraid than doing what you have to do anyway. And ultimately, that's what caused me to leave my corporate job. But having that conversation 90 days later, fully exiting, saying goodbye to all the benefits, all the things that I had over all those years. But I knew that, you know what? I'm afraid, but I got to do what I got to do anyway, because I know that this Podmatch thing is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so that's the first thing I want to share for somebody, because that might be for a listener today. I don't know who you are, but maybe you just heard that and you're like, that's me. I need to step up and take courage. I'm afraid, but I know there's something I need to get up and do anyway. So that's the first piece I wanted to share. And beyond that, once I got into corporate, David, the next thing here is this whole idea of staying focused once again. And I kind of put it into 3 parts. With everything I do, I look to automate, delegate, or eliminate if I possibly can. And so what that means is, if I'm sending emails manually and it's going out every day to a certain group of people, is there a way I can automate that? Okay, no. Is there a way I can delegate that? Can I bring on a team member to now do this email piece for me that I'm not having time to do, and it's very repetitive, right? Or lastly, can I eliminate it, which is usually the hardest? But does this need to happen? And the way I learned this early on is we were putting a lot of effort into Instagram, because when we first started Podmatch, Instagram was the big dog in the social media platforms, right? And then shortly after, TikTok came on the scene, and now I don't even know what it is anymore. But we were putting a lot of effort into it. And I was like, man, this is draining. I'm terrible at it. The engagement isn't that good. We've hired people to work on it. It's not fun. Nobody here likes this. And so finally I just said, if I looked at these 3 things, automate, delegate, eliminate, I'm like, what if we just eliminate it? Everyone's like, that's crazy. We're going to lose business. We just can't do that. Well, I was like, let's try it for a month. Let's just see what happens. We actually didn't lose any business, and we gained more followers, oddly enough. And I know, right? That part didn't make any sense. But we focused more where we knew we were good and what we enjoyed, what brought us life. And we actually grew the business faster. We never went back to a formal Instagram strategy. We don't even use TikTok. And a lot of people will hear that and be like, you're missing opportunity. But let's go back to what I said earlier. Not every opportunity needs to be taken. And for me, I realize that's one of those things that need to be eliminated from the business, because it's not going to bring us our biggest return on investment. And so that's been, for me, been a really big leadership lesson, because as an entrepreneur, I like to do all the things. Naturally, I think a lot of us do. We like to be involved. We like to be in the trenches, right? And to some extent, that's good. But we always need to look back and say, okay, what I'm doing right now, can this be automated, delegated, or eliminated? If yes, I need to take one of those actions and give it that direction. So to me, those are some of the biggest leadership lessons I've learned, is if you're going to lead, you can't be always right there. And every leader is always courageous while they're taking action and doing this.
Yeah, I think it's a very short route, isn't it, to burn out and not really enjoying what you do anymore if you're one of those leaders who just has to do everything or know what's going on or be involved. And I think in the vast majority of cases, people who get stuck in, they're doing it for the right reasons. It's because they really, really care about it, or they want to help. They want to lighten the load for the people they work with. But the result usually is just, it's not great, is it, from a leadership point of view? And I'm going to resist as well getting into another rant about social media. I do find it interesting, though, that I'm not the only person in the world who doesn't enjoy it.
Yeah, and it can be draining often. And I think that we call it social media, but I don't find it to be very social.
No.
We've taken a lot of the social aspect out. It feels like a spot for everyone to post their advertisements, whether that be your new baby, your new business, whatever it might be. It just feels more like advertising versus anything else. There's not a lot of, again, it doesn't feel social to me. And I know we don't want to go on a rant with that, but I will challenge anyone who's an entrepreneur. You don't have to use social media. It is not a requirement for success. Now, I know that's not a popular opinion, but I have seen this work for many people that do a lot better than I do and that most of us do. They don't have any social media at all. And it's just because it's not actually required for success. So for what it's worth, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a controversial statement, but I do agree with you. It's just become one of those things, hasn't it, where, especially for entrepreneurs and business owners, businesses, I guess, we just feel like we have to do it. And if we're not doing it, that we're doing something wrong somehow. And I don't know how we've ended up in that place so quickly, because it hasn't been around that long. Yeah.
I don't know. We could dive deep into psychology. That maybe it's a conversation for another time. You know what? Today, if you're hearing that and you want David to dive deeper on that, reach out. Let him know. I don't know how, David, I don't know how people can contact you, but I know that there's a way they can do it. So they need to just reach out, and maybe you'll find an episode for them in the future on that.
Yeah. I hate to say it, but the easiest way is probably contact me on social media.
There you go. It has its places, of course.
It does, sadly. Yeah. Not sad. The devil, maybe. Moving on, from the opposite perspective, what has been your best experience in your whole career so far of being led? Like, what's the best leader you've ever worked for? You don't have to name names, but if you do, that'd be lovely. But
yeah, I can come up with a few different people, but I'm gonna focus on one specifically for today because I think that listeners are gonna really like this. His name was Paul, and I'll just give him a first name. But he came in as a CEO of the company I worked out. So the aerospace company I was at for 15 years. He came in probably around year 10 that I was there or something like that. And he came in as just before the company was going public. And so brought him in, and he was the first person I reported to that didn't care about my performance. It sounds weird, right? Let me explain. So at that point, I was at the director position. So I wasn't quite C-suite, but I was, a senior director. So I was just below C-suite level. And so I came in for what I thought was my first evaluation. And he didn't have a single question about me. He wanted to see the people that I was leading and what they were doing and how they were doing. And I was kind of like, man, this is like not what I'm used to. He goes, I actually don't care what you're doing. If they're all succeeding and doing really well, it means that you're doing a good job. He's like, so if you can show me metrics that you're doing a good job, but they're not, he goes, does that actually matter? And I was like, nope. I'm like, like that. I got nothing there. Like, you're absolutely right. And so he taught me really well how to equip others, how to position other people to succeed. And I kind of came from this business of starting part-time with that. And you wanted to be seen. You wanted to be recognized because that's how you got promoted, or at least so I thought. But the reality is that's not how he was looking at. He's like, them doing good is a reflection on them, but more so a reflection on you as their leader. And so for me, I stopped taking credit for anything. And I felt like I stopped working nearly as much. Have you ever seen the movie Office Space by chance? David, have you ever seen that? Okay.
Yes, love that film.
So I feel like the guy who got hypnotized or whatever, I don't mean to like ruin the movie for everybody, but he started getting promoted after that. Like he's got management written all over him, right? I felt like that guy because I showed up at the company and I wasn't doing more work. I was doing less, but I was pouring more into equipping others that were working directly under me and teaching them to do the same. And that's ultimately the only reason I got into the C-suite is because I learned to do that and it was from him. Before that, I had really plateaued for quite a few years. I was stuck at that senior director position because I wanted to be seen, but that didn't matter anymore. What needed to happen is me equipping others. So to me, that was the best experience I've ever had being led. It was someone teaching me to lead leaders. And that will forever stick with me as how I want to equip others as well in anything, in podcasting even.
I think it speaks a lot as well to like the prevailing corporate culture, doesn't it? I'm sure it's true in the States. It's certainly true here. But what we measure leaders on, what does leadership performance look like? And I think the fact that you were so surprised that someone, in my opinion, got it right, that says a lot.
Sure does.
Yeah, because I mean, a leader's performance, how do you measure that? It's by the people they're leading, isn't it? Are they meeting the outputs? Are they happy? Are they, not working ridiculous hours? And are they getting the job done? It's it really has to be as simple as that, I think. But yeah, maybe we're
It
the
was
lone voice.
groundbreaking for me when I heard it, but yeah, it should probably be more commonly talked about. Maybe it's just maybe I was in a bad culture. I don't know, but that really stood out to me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's easy to write it off as a bad culture. I don't know if it's necessarily any individual organization or culture that's at fault, though, if it's just like the way it is in the industry, for example. And what you were saying as well about how we get promotions and how it's the look at me, here's my performance stats and all of that. Again, so true. And yet, is that what we want to be looking for in leaders, in people we are elevating up to those roles? Is individual performance the thing that we should be measuring them on? And
I adopted during that time something that I think really helped with this. I came up with this. I didn't hear this anywhere. I think I just kind of learned it subconsciously, but I started deciding that if the person who came after me as I was getting promoted at any of these positions, if the person after me or after any of my managers or leaders under me didn't do better than the person that was there before them, then the person before them did something wrong. And so I brought that philosophy into everything I did. And people were like, what do you mean? I'm like, we should be equipping the next generation to go further than we ever did. Because if you look at the world, like, we're not regressing, like, we're getting better in a lot of ways and we're advancing. It's because people are setting the groundwork for us. And that's what we should be doing in organizations. But so many of us, we want to leave a spot and be like, hey, they had to hire 2 people to do my job. And many of us like, yeah, like, see, because that's how good I am. No, it should be the opposite of that. It should be like, you know what? They're able to take it down to part-time, or this person was able to do so much more than I ever did. And it takes a level of humility, which I think is really important. But we'll get back to that, I'm sure. But anyway, the point is just, I want the people who follow me, that take my leadership role, that do what I'm doing now, to do it so much better than I ever did, because I set a good groundwork, a good foundation for them to build off of.
Yeah, and also it shows that there's an effective recruitment process in place as well, isn't it? Because if you're getting someone who can only do half the job of the last person, then maybe you need to look at how you hire as well.
Yeah.
So, changing direction slightly again, if you could pick one thing that you think most leaders, most managers in the universe are getting right, what would that be, and why is it important?
Yeah, I think that most people that are put in leadership positions, aside from being high performers, I think that's the very obvious one, but they're people that are passionate. We see that they have purpose. They seem to have a why connected to what they do. And I think a lot of people have this. And I think that's super important, because people want to follow passion. They want to follow purpose. So many of us, we lack direction in our lives, that we're willing to grab on to anyone who seems to be going somewhere, right? Like, we want to get on board with that. And it's why typically the people that are the most charismatic, or sometimes even the loudest, which isn't always a good thing, the people that you can tell, man, they are going somewhere. I want to be going somewhere. So I'm going with them because I'm going somewhere. I think that that's what causes us to lead really well. And I think that a lot of us, again, we don't always get this right, but we have this inside of us. And I think that that's ultimately what led us to leadership in the first point. And just to quickly share, I do think how we develop that really matters, because that does bring us our initial traction. But how many times have we seen people that are quote unquote leaders, or people that are like at the top, like they fall? And it's because the passion, the purpose, the why, it wears out. They didn't develop it. They didn't like really think about it. They didn't go beyond just the initial traction they got. It's got to go so much further than that. But I think that is really key. And so for anybody who is like maybe struggling with that, like, we've got to get this stuff right. And the best thing to do is just start letting it out. Like, share it boldly, get out there, be loud about it, right? And if you don't have like a loud voice, I don't necessarily mean yell, but like, make sure people know that's Alex. He loves podcasting, right? Like, we want people to know these things about us.
Yeah. I mean, if not loud, at least honest. Yeah.
That's better. Yeah.
No, I know. I totally agree with you. I think leaders have to care, I think, and I think care about a lot of things, definitely. The people they're leading 100%, I think that's crucial, but the job, like what you're doing, what you're there to do, whether it's from a purpose or a passion, or you just really enjoy the process of the job, or whatever that might be, because it's so much easier, it's infectious almost for people who are following you if they know that you care and they can see that. It's exactly what you've just said. I'm just using different words.
Yeah.
So it makes you a better leader, doesn't it? If you can get that right, that's the key, I think.
For sure.
Okay, I have a time travel question for you.
All right.
You may have already answered it indirectly, but if you were to go back in time to the start of your career, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I've got a few things here. The first one is definitely a callback, but humility. And I did just reference that a few minutes ago. And I knew it would come. There was no way it wasn't going to come up. Like, to me, humility and integrity really have to go hand in hand. Even as a kid, I immediately kind of built this complex that I was good at this and people were going to know I was good at it. I definitely lacked humility. And humility, I think a lot of us get the definition wrong. It doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less. And so for me, what that meant was just maybe not jumping in with like, I'm good at this, right? Hey, we've got a whole group of us. Like, this person cleans these golf balls really well, and that's why we're able to sell them. Like, that's what the 10-year-old Alex should have been saying. Now, maybe that's an extreme example at 10, right? But moving up into big corporate, right? Like, let's go there. When I wanted credit for everything, that was a lack of humility. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be known. And a lot of that was because I was like, I want to get promoted, but like, it was all internal I focused. And so I'm not that I'm like the most humble person on the planet now, but I've definitely worked at it. My wife has helped me a lot. She's helped me see it, and she's really good at, like, in a loving way, helping me grow in that area. And I really appreciate that. And I give her free reign to do that and to help me with that. Same with many of my close friends. I think humility is absolutely key. Beyond that, well, David, real quick, I don't know if you want to add anything there, because the other things I have are going to be very quick. But I don't know if you had anything on humility you wanted to jump in and mention.
You kind of got it at the beginning, but I think it's essential to leadership as well. I think it kind of parallels to my own leadership journey as well. I think, early career, I was very much like you, it was, I all the time, and talking about yourself all the time as well. Not always in as confident a fashion as I might have liked, but that sort of the internal monologue almost was completely the wrong way around. And it shows in your leadership if that's the way that you're thinking of yourself and leadership itself. Whereas when you get to that, and I think it probably happened for both of us in that later stages of our careers, you realize that's the wrong way around, and you start completely changing the way that you're thinking about things and how you interact with people and what leadership actually is about and what that means. And the difference, chalk and cheese. It was just a complete step change, I guess.
It's another mic drop moment, David. I know we don't have like microphones that drop. Mine's hanging on a boom, and yours is anyway. But there it is. Yeah, well, let's not drop the microphone for people. But that's good, man. I'm going to share two more things on this point, and this is like going back to the start of my career, but also just like the younger version of myself. This is the younger version of myself yesterday, and then tomorrow it'll be the one today. So this is like very timely and always has been. But like, I'm still telling myself these things. There are two very quick things. One, the work will never be finished. The work will never be finished. As entrepreneurs, we have this achiever mindset. Many of us, we want things to be done. The reality is, at some point, you just got to close the laptop. You just got to shut it down. You just got to drive home. You just have to shut it down, because the work is never going to be finished no matter what you do. And for me, I need to remember that, because I could see myself potentially working myself to death if I didn't have mentors in my life. And I don't say that to be like extreme or anything like that, but I have no problem working really long hours. But if I work really long hours today, I got to work even longer tomorrow, because the work will never be done. And we have to be okay with the fact that the work will just never be finished. The second thing here I wanted to mention as well is, this is something I write down, and I wrote it down here because I want to read it and make sure I get it right. I write this down every day. I am not in control of the outcomes, only the levers that trigger possibilities. I am not in control of the outcomes, only the levers that trigger possibilities. I'm not in control of my company being open or closed tomorrow. Like, I'm really not. But I know what's possible because I'm moving those levers, and I'm just going to do that. I'm going to release myself from the outcome, because that is completely out of my control or anyone else's control. That right there should help all of us as leaders, as entrepreneurs, be able to take a deep breath and say, I'm going to do what I know drives a good possible outcome, but I'm going to release myself from the outcome. Doing that has caused so much less stress in my life. I live a much freer life because of that one. So those are the last two things I wanted to share to my younger self, which tomorrow, when I listen to this podcast, whenever it comes out, David, I'll remember, and I'll be learning it then once again.
Yeah, that third one, incredibly healthy way to look at it. I don't think I'm there yet. The second one, though, I've actually found that a lot easier since I started working for myself. I found that a real struggle when I was part of a previous business, when I co-founded, when I was an employee. I felt that pressure to, I worked way longer hours than I do now. I was constantly obsessing about those outcomes as well. So again, there's a common theme there. Working for myself, I found it almost like that sense of freedom that you get when you don't have to answer to a boss anymore. And I did work on it a lot as well. And I'm a lot better now at closing the laptop when it's time.
That's good. That takes a lot of self-discipline, but I'll tell you what, it's very rewarding when you can learn to do that.
Yeah. It helps to have a slight bit of laziness in your nature.
Yeah. Yes, it does.
Leadership Heroes.
Okay, Alex, well, I'm sad to say, but I've only got one question left for you. But on a positive note, it's my favourite one. So it's called Leadership Heroes. You've probably heard it before. So the question is, if you had to pick one person, it could be anyone you like. They could be alive, dead, past, present, real, or even fictional, if you wish. But it's got to be someone that would perfectly embody leadership, in your opinion. Who would that person be for you, and why?
Yeah, David, I try not to I knew this question was coming as a listener to your podcast, so but I try not to script it or anything like that. But the one name I couldn't get out of my head was Jesus, which for a lot of people maybe seems cliche. I happen to be a follower of Jesus, and here's the thing: whether you're listening to this and whether you believe in the person of Jesus or not, let's just say, which this is not what I believe. Let's just say Jesus is a fictional character. If you read this story, I still believe that's a perfect embodiment of what leadership and integrity looks like. I think it's both those things. To me, he's someone that everyone wanted to follow or didn't want to follow, right? And I think that's an example of leadership. We're not for everybody, we're for somebody. And I think that was a really great example of that. And also, ultimately died for what he believed in, to love and serve the people that he was there for. To me, servant leadership is the highest form of leadership. And that was the ultimate example. And again, I've devoted my life to this. So all of my leadership principles go back to this. Whether that's what you listening to this believe or not, let's just agree from a fictional level even, right? Let's just say that's the case. That's still a really great example of leadership. And I think that if we can be the type of leader that says, you know what, I'm going to humble myself. I'm going to serve the people that are supposed to be serving me, even when they're not doing a good job, man, ultimately being willing to take that all the way to a grave, man, that form of leadership is just so rare in today's world. But I think it's one that I strive to be more like, and I'm nothing like that or anywhere near it yet. But I'm telling you, every day as I dive into that, I do feel I get a little bit closer every day. But that would be, to me, the ultimate example.
He is a great example. I agree. And I think that's probably why so many people pick him in answering this question. I mean, servant leadership comes up as well in that context. And I agree with you there. I think other aspects, though, like what we've been talking about today, the humility of it. And I don't know the stories as well as you, I'm certain. But the washing the feet, that story, I mean, that's humility and leadership. Also promoting the right values and integrity to your beliefs as well. So the story in the temple and kicking the traders out, that whole aspect as well. I'm really testing my previous upbringing now.
Yeah, you're doing pretty good. I was like, man, you had me fooled. All right, that's
it's
good.
It's been a while since I've had to prove it. Yeah. But no, I mean, yeah, whatever you believe about him or don't, I think absolutely there's powerful lessons in whether it's stories, whether it's fact, whatever your perspective. So yeah, he is a great example, and I'm sure it won't be the last time we have him pop up in Leadership Heroes either.
I'm sure he's pretty popular in the podcasting world if you look up key names. So
yes, indeed, yeah. And I think it's again whatever you believe about him or don't, you can't argue that his message has endured, and I think there's a reason for that.
Yeah, well said.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Alex, time has been flying. I could go for another hour happily, but I don't want to be disrespectful of your time.
Same. I don't want to be disrespectful of your listeners' time. So yeah, with you though, this has been a really great conversation. I mean, I can't thank you enough for having me today. This has been a blast. Yeah,
well, thanks for being here. It's been great to finally meet you after years of membership on Podmatch and hearing stories about you as well, and seeing your face pop up in the tutorial videos and all sorts. So it's great to have an actual conversation with you. I think we've probably covered where listeners can find out more about you if they'd like to, but is there anything you would like to add to that before we wrap up?
Sure. I mean, everything I do is podcasting related. And if anyone checking this out is interested in being a guest host, or if you are a guest or a host, you can go to podmatch.com/free. That'll just give you 5 quick things that I don't need your email address or anything like that. Just 5 quick things that might help you along the way. Again, whether you're aspiring to be or you already are in the space. And again, that's podmatch.com/free. But David, again, I recommend people hang here. Next step is go back and listen to episode 151. I think that would be a good follow up to this. But David, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being on Podmatch, and you're truly a gift to the podcasting space. So thank you.
Well, the feeling's very mutual. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Alex. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you again so much to Alex for his time today, his conversation, his insights, the great stories that he shared with us, and of course for podmatch.com as well. If you would like to learn more about him, do head over to the links that he shared just now. I have popped a copy of those in the show notes as well, so just click on that. And yeah, learn more things about podcasting. As always, do get in touch with me as well if you are a new leader, someone in a transitional moment of their career. Maybe you've taken a promotion recently, you're responsible for more people. Maybe you are an entrepreneur, you have founded your first business and you are now hiring for the first time. If leadership is something you're worried about, struggling with, or you just want to be better at, because even capable leaders recognize there's always more to learn. So if that sounds like you, do come and visit the website www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. Sign up for the community or drop me a message. There are also other programs available. Thank you so much for listening or watching today. Do join us again next week when I'll be joined by revenue coach Kristin Javago. That's all from me today. Take care of yourselves, and until next time, be a leader, not a boss.